Hey everybody, this is Rod Meldrum, the Book of Mormon Evidence guy. And we just finished up with the most incredible interview with Carl Anderson, the guy known as Mr. Kirtland by President Hinckley. And I just wanted to follow up. We had a fabulous interview. Unfortunately, we ran out of time with him, and there was still a lot of things that we needed to cover that we talked about that we were going to cover. So I'm going to just go ahead and cover those things now. And so hopefully just strap in and be ready to go, because we've got a lot of things still to cover about Kirtland and the church's purchase of the Kirtland Temple, but also many of the other sites and things that are in the Nauvoo area. So one of my favorite parts of Kirtland is actually going through the visitor center and the Kirtland Temple. And I just want to tell you, it's one of my, this is something that hopefully it's not going to be too much of a spoiler alert for anybody here. But when you go to the Kirtland Temple, you go into the visitor center there, and they have this big, beautiful auditorium, and it's got kind of like curtains in the front and on the sides. They have a lot of images and things of the different leaders of the community of Christ, and so you go in, you sit down, you watch this nice film about the Kirtland Temple, and at the end of it is a very cool spot. Basically, it has a small vocal group who is singing "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning," and as it does so, you've been sitting in this auditorium that's been completely dark, and then the screen basically begins to roll up. And the next thing you know, what you didn't know was that you're sitting in a room that has a huge curtain. And as that curtain parts open, all of a sudden you begin to see a full panoramic view of the incredible Kirtland Temple. And I just love that part of the tours. And this is the view basically that you see through this. It's a huge glass wall basically that you're looking through, and you get to see the Kirtland Temple. There's a few things I just wanted to touch bases with you about that. There's an image there that we just saw of that, and we have so I wanted to point out just very briefly for those who may have not caught this in the previous episode, is that the spire of the temple has some really interesting symbolism in it. The temple, this temple in Kirtland, and also the temple in Nauvoo, were actually seen in vision by the prophet Joseph Smith. So that's how we actually got the style, the shape, the size, and everything of the temple was actually by revelation to the prophet Joseph Smith. And I find it fascinating to consider the fact that Joseph Smith had in the plans this spire. So if you take a look at the spire, you essentially see some things. I'm going to just tell you really quickly symbolically. In the Hebrew symbols, there is a square or rectangle has 4 corners and is considered to be a representation of the earth. Okay, well, a globe or a sphere, a circle, is represented as where God dwells, basically eternity, eternal life, forever, and those kinds of concepts. So but there is a geometric configuration that's between a circle and a square, which is a octagon. Interestingly enough, if you've ever been to the Salt Lake Temple, you'll see on the 2 front doors that slide open as you walk in. This is on the older one before it was remodeled, so I don't know if that's going to have that again still. But basically, there's a glass, about a 4-inch by 4-inch piece of glass that is in a square. Then there's a second one on top of that, which is basically rotated about 45 degrees or so. And then on top of that is a little beehive. If you take those two pieces of glass, the ones rotated, that creates an 8-pointed star. If you actually were to connect the tips of each one of those points of the 8-pointed star, it creates an octagon. So what's the big deal about an octagon? Well, actually, there's a lot. There's actually, on the San Diego Temple, there's over 10,000 times this motif is emblazoned all over the San Diego Temple. And even if you look straight down at the San Diego Temple itself, it actually creates one of these configurations. And in fact, the architect, as I understand it, the architect of the San Diego Temple was quite enamored with this particular motif. And they said, what does this represent? Is it anything special? And somebody took this to Hugh Nibley, and Hugh Nibley said, yeah, that's the seal of Melchizedek. And now, how does Hugh Nibley know about that? Well, he said, well, because there's ancient mosaics that have been done that had Melchizedek over the top of what, had a person standing behind an altar, and on the altar was this particular motif. This thing, it has basically it's a kind of a circle within a square, but then the square has actually an 8-pointed star or an octagon, and so it's a really fascinating motif, and that is the perfect geometric configuration between a circle and a square. Well, if you consider the temple here in this image right here, and you take a look at the spire, amazingly, the spire has a base that is a square. Okay, so the square represents what? Represents the earth. And then up at the top, there's a small ball, but there's also kind of a half dome up on top of there, representing a circle. And in between the square and the circle is this octagon shape. And the octagon shape is interesting because it is what is between the circle, which is representation of God, and the earth, which is representation, or excuse me, the square, which is representation of the earth. And this octagon structure is in between. The temple is symbolic in that we go there to learn more about how we can become like God is. And the symbolism here shows that if we are going to try to make it to God, we start from the earth, but we have to go through this octagon. Now, the octagon, the seal of Melchizedek, is interesting because who was Melchizedek? Well, Melchizedek was the king of Salem, and we have the Melchizedek priesthood, but the original name of the priesthood was actually the priesthood after the holy order of the Son of God. And the reason for the changing of that to Melchizedek was so that the name of God was not being too repetitious as far as its use. So Melchizedek was inserted instead of Christ. But if you go back to the original name of the priesthood, it's kind of a fascinating thing because it's the priesthood after the holy order of the Son of God. What that means is that Jesus Christ is the mediator. As only through Christ can we go from earth to heaven, to God, and that is represented by the octagon structure. And you're going to see this again in the Nauvoo Temple. So it's just some interesting symbolism I wanted to share with you in regard to this because of the fact that this temple was actually shown how to be built, and its design was actually by the Lord. Okay, so there's a little bit closer image of that. You can see the octagon structure on top of that. Then you can see the Kirtland Temple has some big, beautiful windows, and that makes it just absolutely wonderful to be in there. I can't remember if we actually talked about it for sure with Carl Anderson, but there's basically 3 levels of the temple here, and they have the main level. And then there's the upper part, which is, you can see these windows up there in the upper part, and then there's the very top part, which is kind of the attic. There has some little dormer windows up there, and the original School of the Prophets was there. Joseph Smith had an office there, and there were many wonderful things that happened in the temple in this area. So this is just another view there of the spire of the temple there. I wanted to talk to you just really quickly about the quarrying process. As we mentioned in the previous interview with Carl Anderson, we talked about how the temple is made out of this rubble stone construction, which is essentially big chunks of rock, then just pretty much just mortared together. The walls are about 4.5 feet thick at the base, and they taper up to about 2.5 feet thick at the top of the walls. And this is actually an image of the quarry, which is on just down Chillicothe Road there in Kirtland, and you can actually still see some of the original drilling marks from the drills that were used by the brethren and Joseph Smith at the time as they were hauling rocks from this quarry. Here's another image. You can see a little bit farther away. You can see this wall, and you can see the vertical lines going up and down here where they actually would drill us. Now, the drilling process was quite an interesting process because essentially they would take these big steel chisels, essentially, and they had kind of an end on it that was flattened out into kind of a tip. And then they would have usually 2 guys, and they would have somebody that's holding the drill in place, and then somebody with a sledgehammer would hammer on it, and then the person who was holding the drill would rotate it about halfway, or 30, 40 degrees, and then they would hit it again. They would rotate it and hit it again and rotate it. And they'd just keep doing this until they literally, I mean, you can see most of these are about 1.5 feet or so deep into the rock. This is limestone. And then they would actually take that, put pry bars in there, break the rock off, and then they would haul it up in wagons and take it up to the temple. You can see some of again, the vertical lines. This is one that didn't break off quite properly. So you can see the drill holes are kind of still there in the middle of this. But you can see the other drill marks there where the stones from the temple. This is actually one that got broken off, but didn't actually end up being taken to the temple. So it's kind of just sitting there, waiting to go for the temple, for the masons to be able to actually to put this as part of the temple, but it never made it there. So this is one of the early images of Kirtland, and it's actually showing. You can see the temple up there on top of the bluff, and there's a few homes up there, kind of close to the temple. Then there's this kind of a flat area there. The area there in the flat is now owned by the church, and has been for the last number of years the Kirtland Visitor Center, and it's pretty awesome to be able to go there and see that, and then see the temple up above. The church has not owned the temple proper until just the last couple of weeks ago, but there's also a house. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. This is a beautiful painting that's there in the visitor center that you can take a look at, just depicting the men working there and the women also working on the temple as it's nearing its completion there. This is in the very beginning. Now you can kind of see on this is about half of one of my tour groups here with me, just coming out. They can only take about half at a time in the temple, and you can see some of the cracks. Now those cracks are actually, right now, they're actually painted on there. They have plastered over the cracks there, but this is really a big concern for the Kirtland Temple, because of the fact that this rubble stone construction is very, very, it would be horrible in an earthquake. An earthquake would basically take this rubble stone and make it just rubble. And so that's why I'm hoping that the church will quickly determine the needs of the temple to be able to keep it from earthquake hardening it. And of course, no other church, I don't think, in the world is more adept at being able to earthquake harden these historic buildings than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we're grateful to have the opportunity to keep and preserve these temples, specifically this one, as one of the earliest temples in this, or as the earliest dispensation, or temple of this dispensation. Again, just another beautiful view of the Kirtland Temple here and the spire, and it's just a beautiful area. There's a good side shot that you can kind of take a look at that. Just wanted to show you this. Now, the Newell Key Whitney store, we talked about that with Carl Anderson, and that's one of my favorite stories about Kirtland, is actually when Joseph Smith first met Newell K. Whitney. He had actually left in a sleigh with Emma. They came out in the middle of the winter to come, and they arrived at the store there in Kirtland, and Joseph Smith got off the sleigh, came up into the store, opened the door, and said something to the effect of, "Newell K. Whitney, thou art the man." And Newell K. Whitney looked up from what he was doing in the store, kind of a little bit startled, looked at Joseph Smith and said, "You obviously know who I am, but I have no idea who you are." And then Joseph Smith said, "I'm Joseph Smith, the prophet. You've prayed me here. Now what do you want?" Can you imagine Newell K. Whitney's surprise as the first time that he actually meets the prophet Joseph Smith, and what an introduction that was. They ended up many revelations from the Lord Jesus Christ to Joseph Smith actually happened, and also where the School of the Prophets was, where Christ appeared to those men who were involved with that, and we talked about that just pretty extensively with Carl Anderson. So I'm not going to take up too much time with that. This is inside the School of the Prophets, and we already did think we showed a couple of pictures of that, but I just want to emphasize again how small this room was. I mean, we're talking about the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ on the earth. And there was this tiny little room that barely 15, maybe 20 people could fit in if they're shoulder to shoulder and sitting, just really tight. And yet this is the room that Jesus Christ actually came to, and a couple of different occasions. And it was, I mean, if he was standing in this room, you literally would be about arm's distance away from touching the Savior. This is the fireplace that's in this sacred room here, the school of the prophets. Another nice shot of the Neil K. Whitney store. The street that it was on was actually the main street previously. Now that luckily the church actually purchased that, and I think and go back to the interview with Carl Anderson to learn about a little bit more about who almost got killed on that street. Okay, and then this is actually. Previously, this is the Joseph Smith and Emma home that was just down the street from the Kirtland Temple. It's been now since purchased by the church, and the church owns that and has completely gone in and taken it back to what it was originally in the time of Joseph Smith and Emma and the Kirtland Temple. So that Kirtland period has basically been taken back, and we've had a chance to actually take groups back there already and to go through that wonderful home of Joseph Smith. It was one of their first homes, very small. Not anything that you would be, talking about, like not like the mansion house or anything like that. It was pretty utilitarian, and I think it was just a nice place for Joseph and Emma because they had gone through so much. So Joseph and Emma, when they first got there, they were actually with Isaac Morley on his farm for a while. They had the twins that died. They took on the Murdoch twins. They moved out to the John Johnson farm and was out there and received many revelations. This is where Joseph Smith got tarred and feathered, and Sidney Rigdon and others were involved. Well, mostly Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith were involved in the tarring and feathering. And this is where one of the two Murdoch twins died. Then they moved into the Whitney store up on top, and that's where they actually were until they got to this house. So this is the house that they lived in then, just in the final part of the Kirtland period. This is actually the John Johnson farm. This is the fireplace that they had there. This is one of the early Bibles actually that is actually today. If you'll notice the stoop or the stone that is by the front door, okay? So you can see it a little bit clearer in this image here, or even this one right here. This is interesting because these particular stones were the actual stones that were there during the time that Joseph and Emma lived with the Johnson family. It was through this door that Joseph was dragged out to be tarred and feathered. It was on this stoop that Joseph Smith several times actually gave sermons that he would give. In fact, the morning after the tarring and feathering, they spent most of the night removing the tar from Joseph and the tar and the feathers from Joseph's skin and his body. And the next morning he got up and delivered a sermon. Some of the ruffians who actually were involved with the tarring and feathering were actually there at the sermon that next day. But Joseph Smith delivered that sermon from that actual piece of stone there. That's where he actually gave that. This is called the Bowery site. So they had built a Bowery in front of that. So in this hot summer sun, the people could sit under a kind of a shady. They'd put branches and things over the top and kind of break up the sun so it would be much less hot. It's very humid, as you know, that back there, and so the hot humidity of a summer day would be really pretty overbearing, especially when you have these big full dresses and the way that the men dress and so forth. They would have been very hot. So this would have really helped them out to be able to stay there and listen to some of these sermons. Went on for several hours. I just want to finish up here with a couple of other things in Kirtland. This is the sawmill that they used to build homes and so forth. To make the planks and the lumber from the trees that were in the area there, and they used that to saw it up. This is also the ashery. So the ashery was important. It's a very important part of the income for the people there in and around the Nauvoo area. It was actually put together by Neil K. Whitney. It was actually on his farm. Both of these things were on his property. and so they would actually take their ashes from their fireplaces and take them in and then process that into that's called potash, and that was used in all kinds of industrial things and for fertilizers and for making pottery and glass and so forth. So anyway, it's a very important part of the financial part of the people there in the Kirtland area. The Newell K. Whitney store, and this is a group saying, "See ya later" from Kirtland. So I'm going to finish up. This is the end of the Kirtland information. Okay, so folks, this is our deep dive. I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to spend with us, and hopefully you've enjoyed the interview with Carl Anderson, Mr. Kirtland, and I hope that you've learned a lot about the construction, the history, the symbolism, and so forth of the Kirtland Temple, and we hope that don't forget to subscribe here below, and click that so you can get our next ones. We're going to be doing another release here shortly about the Nauvoo purchases and some of the deep dive on the Nauvoo, the red brick store, the mansion house, and other properties that the church recently acquired from the Community of Christ. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate your time, and we hope that this is you find this is important and relevant information. And we'll see you next time.